I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, terrible anti-Semitic reports coming out of Great Britain. Just stunning expressions of anti-Semitism seem to be gripping the UK and British politics. A headline in the online worldjewishdaily.com reads, "Darkness falls over Labour, why the left can't deal with its own anti-Semitism." By the way, I hope all of you sign up to receive the World Jewish Daily online. It offers a superb summary of Jewish news and includes the major columns and editorials being written on Jewish-related events. In any case, the story of virulent anti-Semitism gripping the British political landscape is becoming the #1 story in the Jewish community. Most recently, the former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, went on record saying that Hitler was a Zionist for encouraging German Jewry to immigrate to Palestine, a statement for which Mr. Livingstone was suspended from the Labour Party. And it was revealed that one Labour Party member, Naz Shah, suggested on her Facebook page before winning a party seat that Israeli Jews should be relocated to the United States and that the U.S. would ultimately save money if it cuts its defense appropriations to Israel and just uses that money to bring Israelis to the U.S. Then there's Nick Cohen, a British columnist who writes that it's no longer good enough to criticize Israel for its occupation of the West Bank or to argue for a two-state solution now in Great Britain. Due to a strong Islamic anti-Semitism there, one must call for all Jews to be swept out of Israel. The result is that the esteemed British Labour Party is now ruled by the anti-Semitic far left, personified by the recently elected leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. And as Brits go to their own polls in local elections on May 5th, Corbyn is broadcasting and boasting that Labour will not lose seats or influence, though experts say Labour could actually lose as many as 100 seats. At the same time, there are reports that the Labour Party has secretly ousted 50 members of its party for anti-Semitic and racist comments. One party member even likened Adolf Hitler to a former well-known British soccer star. And Mr. Corbyn is acknowledging that a small problem exists in the Labour Party. Well, what's this all mean for the Jews of Great Britain, those in London and those throughout the UK? For some insight and perspective, I am so honored to have on our JBS phones from England, Rabbi Barry Marcus, the highly respected rabbi at the Central Synagogue of London. Barry, thank you so much for joining us on JBS.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
Barry, I want to talk for one moment about you before I ask you about the problems in Great Britain. You were born in South Africa, yes?
That's right. That's correct.
And I understand you come from a very distinguished family of rabbis. Is that correct?
That is also correct, yes.
Who are we talking about here, Barry?
Well, we're talking about the Taz and talking about the Shach. We're talking about an unbroken line of rabbis going back to the Taz and the Shach, and also to a gentleman who was known as the Bach. He was once the chief rabbi of Krakow in the 1600s. So we have a sort of a long rabbinic line and an unbroken for quite a few centuries now.
Well, Mazel Tov, and
Thank you.
That's wonderful yichus and good for you. I should tell our audience, by the way, but you served as a rabbi in Johannesburg, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you have received from the Queen of England the Order of the Member of the British Empire.
That's right.
And under what circumstances did that happen for you, Barry?
That was given to me for my services to Holocaust education.
Uh-huh.
About 20 years ago, I pioneered a scheme of taking or going to Auschwitz just for the day initially it was meant for local young British Jews, because I was a little concerned with their lack of understanding and knowledge and connection to the Shoah and what happened. Only 21 miles of water separate the United Kingdom from Europe.
Yes.
And I started this program mainly, as I say, in the Jewish community, and then eventually linked up and was asked if I could use this model to go a little wider into the non-Jewish community. And together with the Holocaust Education Trust, we now mainly take non-Jewish school children and teachers. We take about 3,000 a year. I've now taken about 35,000 people on this program, where they have a seminar before they go. They meet a Holocaust survivor. We spend a full day in Auschwitz I and Birkenau. Then we come back and have a follow-up seminar. And this is up and down the country. It's in Edinburgh, it's in Manchester, Newcastle, up and down the country. It's basically, I work more now with the non-Jewish students in an effort to try and get our message across and to let them begin to understand why we are so nervous when we hear the former president of Iran, in the same breath that he denies the Holocaust, he threatens yet another one on Israel.
Yes.
And the way forward, I thought, was to educate and try and get our message across. And because of tremendous government support, we are able now to go into non-Jewish schools and speak, and not only speak and talk, but also take them on this program.
Well, Mazel Tov, Yashica, it's fabulous work you do. I am really, as I said in the open, I am honored to be able to present you here in the States to JVS. Barry, how long have you been a rabbi?
Well, I've been a rabbi now for about 35 years.
Well, good for you. Do you have family?
Yes, I have children in Israel and grandchildren in Israel.
No grandchildren or children in England anymore?
I have one daughter still left in England. But my grandchildren are all in Israel.
Okay. Well, you have a wonderful story. If you're ever in the United States, Barry, you have to come and sit with me in studio and we'll talk more. But first, I just want you now to react to the way I described the situation of anti-Semitism in Great Britain today. Did I give an accurate picture? Do you want to modify the picture at all?
Well, look, I think you've got the Rashi Prakim, the bullet points, I think were correct. I think people were quite astounded at what developments just in the last few weeks. But my response is slightly different. And on Pesach, I spoke to my community, and I said to them, look, it's very difficult as a Jew to relate to events that took place in Egypt 3,300 years ago. It's a lot easier to relate to the events that we've read in the newspaper with the former mayor and so on. But my response to that was, Ma nishtana hayom hazeh. Because I think most of us, and certainly myself, we've been aware for a long time of an undercurrent in the United Kingdom, and we've seen our students, and my synagogue is in the middle of London, where many of the universities are to be found, and we are sort of the campus university synagogue, or the closest one, and we have been hearing from them the immense pressure under which they have been asked to study, almost running the gauntlet, and where university authorities have allowed hate preachers to come in, and this has been an uncomfortable position, and the sort of Jewish community has been very slow to react and to respond. And I think as someone born in South Africa, the son of immigrants to South Africa who escaped Nazi Europe, I have maybe just a little more sensitivity. And also I'm not afraid to speak out, and I have done so on a number of occasions. But I think to understand Anglo Jewry, many of them are very conflicted. They're conflicted as Jews. Part of it is only a few, 30, 40 years Jews over here who were allowed to come into this country, change their names in order to get to university. And that, I'm telling you this because there was already then, at that stage, a sense that we were foreigners. And of course, Jews were expelled in the 1200s. I mean, the whole blood libel was born in this country in the horrible events that took place in York and Beauport at the end of the 12th century. The Crusaders who went into Europe took across that message: pillaging, killing, and raping. So there is here a long history where Jews do feel uncomfortable. As I say, they were expelled and only let back by Cromwell some 350 years ago. So Jews here feel a little reticent to actually speak up here, and have allowed, the leadership has allowed, I think, by inaction and by a typical sort of British response, don't rock the boat kind of thing. We'll deal with it quietly. But the dealing quietly hasn't helped much. And whereas anti-Semitism has always been just here below the surface, just during the war there were black shirts. There was Mazel who led fascists over here, and there were fights in the streets. Oswald Mosley, rather. Apologies for that. So there's been a history of anti-Semitism, a lot of it from the far right. The difference is now, and I think this is where the shock is, that a lot of people have realized in the once, sort of party for all, the Labour Party, has also allowed itself to allow anti-Israel sentiment to spill over into open anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And it's been unchallenged. It's
I
not
understand.
been challenged, and we've known about it for a long while.
Okay. I have a couple of questions
Sure.
that come out of what you've said. One is about you personally. You grew up in South Africa. You have a wonderful yichus and long lineage in South Africa. And you've said you've been a rabbi for some 30 years. How long have you actually been at Central Synagogue in London?
I've been here for 21 years.
Okay. Do you feel British?
I do. I do to a degree. I feel more British than I do South African.
Okay. And is it fair for me to say, and again, this would be a discussion I could have with anybody on JBS, Barry, would I be right to say that your overwhelming sense of identity is as a Jew, and then the secondary in terms of nationality would be English? Is that fair?
It is fair, but look, I'm happy to be living in a country that's still tolerant, that did accept Jews, and does give us space as Jews here, but things are slightly uncomfortable because when people ask me, are you comfortable as a Jew? Look, certainly I feel British in terms of a citizen, but in terms of my faith, I'm Jewish.
Yes.
And that never seemed to be a problem in the United Kingdom, and I don't believe it is a major problem. But the fact that my synagogue and many other synagogues have to have CCTV cameras and we have to have security, the fact that we have to invest money in these things rather than in education or in other humanitarian issues makes me very angry.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't understand that it's not just good enough to take measures to protect yourself. You need to be dealing with the real issue. Why is it that we need to put these things up? Are there CCTV cameras in churches in this country? No. And when I speak to people of other faiths, they are absolutely astounded.
Mm-hmm. Then forgive me. I want to press you a little bit.
Fine.
I don't understand why you at the same time say you feel comfortable and that you feel that England and the UK is sort of an open, tolerant society. It's from an American perspective, from an American Jewish perspective. And incidentally, just so I'm clear, there are synagogues that also have police cars in front of them in New York City. There are cameras that are there for American synagogues and Jewish centers all over the country. But if you talk to American Jews, they have no sense that they are under siege, that there is a political element of the country that is anti-Semitic, and that we normally, very rare exceptions, Barry, ever hear of somebody being physically assaulted or murdered.
Okay. I need maybe just to stop and tell you that my comment about synagogues having to have protection, my comment would be the same for synagogues in the United States. It is a statement of sadness, and that places of worship in today's time need to have that protection. That is what I find sad. I don't feel under threat in the United Kingdom. I don't feel physically under threat, but we, of course, feel very upset about the open statements of anti-Semitism by people in positions of responsibility. If you want to know about people feeling under threat physically, then you need to speak to the French Jews who have joined my community in the last few years.
Yes.
They felt physically uncomfortable. We don't feel physically uncomfortable.
Very interesting.
We can still walk around, but we're just more aware of some of the really derisory remarks made years ago, which were initially aimed at Israel or the settlers, but really it was just a cover for, anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And now people feel more emboldened to actually come out and say things which they probably thought, but now feel, as I say, they can come out and express them publicly.
All right.
But they've been condemned. There's no question there's been condemnation from the Prime Minister and from many quarters.
And you don't...
Sorry?
You don't feel physically threatened. Do I understand?
Not at all.
You're not worried for your daughter who still lives in London?
No, not at all.
Okay. And that is a dramatic contrast, is it not, with the Jews of Paris and the Jews of France?
Absolutely. I don't think one can compare what has happened. 8,000 Jews have made Aliyah in the last year alone. In the last year, whereas the average was 1,000 a year from France to Israel, 8,000 have upped and gone, and many have come to the United Kingdom. We've got French minyanim sprouting up all over the Sharia. Mm-hmm. And from them, we especially what happened at the supermarket, and then in Toulouse when the Rabbi and his children were killed. I mean, they feel physically intimidated. We don't feel that here. We just are. I think a lot of people are coming to the terms that whereas the anti-Semitism in this country traditionally came from the far right, it's now coming from the left.
Yes. And
the same people who ignore what Muslims are doing to each other, and the anti-Israel sentiment that is routinely to be heard on Palestinian and other Arab TV stations, that is ignored completely, and having a go at Israel, criticizing Israel, as I say, spilled over into anti-Jewish stuff, and the left, whom we would have thought would have been more sensitive to the racism and the stuff coming out of the Middle East, they are completely tone deaf and ignore all of that.
By the way,
that I think is what has happened in the last week. People have suddenly come to terms with the fact that people who should politically be an ally of Jewish people are exactly not there. But not all of them.
I understand.
But there seems to be Corbyn, who has had anti-Israel views for a long time. That has probably made it okay for the former mayor and some of the Muslim MPs and councillors who've been tweeting the most horrible stuff.
I don't know if you've been able to see any of the reportage in the Jewish community here in America. I'm trying to gauge, and I think you give us a fabulous overview, but I'm trying to gauge the extent to which there may be a story being overblown here on the American Jewish scene. And I wonder if you have any instinct here. Do you feel that we here in America, American Jews who worry for European Jewry, look at the stories that are coming out of Great Britain about the Labour Party and Corbyn, and we make more of it than we would if we were living alongside you in London and going to
absolutely.
Synagogue.
I mean, just as an aside, a lot of people look at Bernie Sanders, in almost the same way that we look at Corbyn, with some of his sort of, tendencies and his views.
How fascinating.
Sorry?
That's fascinating.
So, we're not under siege. Students have had a rough time, but there seems to be the beginnings of the will to actually deal with it, and that is going to take some time. And in a way, what's happened in the last week is brought a lot of this out into the open. Mm-hmm. But it's not as if people feel that they can't go about their daily lives as Jews here, or we feel that we are under siege or threatened physically. Yes, there are incidents of anti-Semitism here in the same way that you have them in America and Canada, but certainly less than on the continent.
Okay.
A lot less than the continent.
In France, in many cities in France, Jews are careful not to wear symbols of Jewishness. They won't wear young.
Absolutely.
Okay. What about in Great Britain?
You'll still see people walking around with kippot, and you'll see people who are very obviously Jewish by their dress. I don't see people changing that. Yes, there have been the reports of abuse there, but it's been a case for quite a few years.
Okay.
And it's not any different from some of the abuse that Jews have taken the continent, and probably also in America in certain suburbs, Brooklyn, Williamsburg. People sometimes would have insults thrown at them, but we don't feel physically threatened. We are aghast, disappointed at people in positions of responsibility mouthing and expressing these things. This is, I think, where this past few weeks has been a little bit of a shock.
Okay.
But not to all of us, because a lot of us have known that there is, and I personally, there is anti-Semitism, but it's not rife. There are some good people in this country. There's some non-Jewish people fighting our corner, and that is sometimes the most effective way to try and deal and flush people with these views, to flush them out into the open.
Yes. In America, American Jews are very concerned about the growing strength of the BDS movement to boycott, sanctions, and divestment. Is there a virulent BDS movement in Great Britain?
There is a BDS movement, but I think they are not effective at all. They make a bit of noise. But the trade between Israel and Britain has increased. Mm-hmm. So the reality on the ground doesn't show that it's affected at all. It's just more an irritation, but it's not been effective at all. As I say, the sad thing is that these are the same people who are now on the left of the political spectrum who ignore the fact that Palestinian children are being indoctrinated to kill Jews. That is all ignored, and I think this is where one would have expected them to be a little more even-handed, and that's not the case. Yes. So there is irritation, there is disappointment, but the trade, it's not a major player, the BDS. Certainly not. And as I say, in the last year, I only saw the figures a few days ago. Trade has actually gone up between Israel and the United Kingdom.
Okay. One more question on this line.
Sure.
To what extent is the anti-Semitism, anti-Israel movement or sentiment in Great Britain, whether it's expressed through the Labour Party or in other areas, to what extent is it fueled by Islamic extremism?
That's the real. I think you've asked the most sort of pertinent question, because a lot of the universities and colleges have been infiltrated by hate preachers who, until recently, were given carte blanche to go in and spread their poison. And even in some of the finest universities, they have got societies that are predicated on hatred of Israel and hatred of Jews. A lot of money came from Libya and Saudi Arabia, into many of the universities over here, and they've bought quite a lot of influence. So there's no question in my mind that a lot of this is driven by Muslim people in this country, and that it tends to spike when there's conflict in Israel.
What do you hope British Jewry does now? What do you hope they do? How do you hope they internalize the kind of Jewish identity that you describe? What do you hope for them, Barry?
Well, I think they could take a leaf out of some of the organizations, the Anti-Defamation and others in America, where I think the difference is American Jewry are not afraid to stand up and speak out. British Jews are a little more reticent to do that. And you see, in my view, it's not enough to suspend a member of parliament who's made anti-Semitic tweets. They need to be thrown out. That message needs to be, heard by all and sundry, that it's just not acceptable. And, when you have an inquiry and then you let them back into the party, that is just, I think, ducking the issue. And this is where there needs, as I say, I look to American Jewry and to the way you seem to deal with issues over there with a lot more vigor than Anglo Jewry seems just a little more reticent to, go out into the streets and fight.
It is wonderful to have met you on the phone, Barry. Again, I really hope if you ever cross the pond, you will sit with me. I'd love to know more about you. And I also, whether you come here or whether we do it on the phone, I'd love to talk to you more about how Jewish self-identity is being shaped within the British Jewish community. So we will talk often, but I thank you so much for giving us time and some insight. Thank you, Barry.
All the best. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you have it, the thoughts of Rabbi Barry Marcus of Central Synagogue in London. And it's interesting, while he does describe the way in which he is disappointed in some of the things that British Jewry does or feels, at the same time he thinks that the story may be slightly overblown in the American Jewish community. So it was very good to hear what he had to say. My thanks, as always, to our director and production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, to editor Dennis Golan, to JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.